Hi there, folks. Welcome to Stinchfield, the podcast, a special edition from the Florida Keys, talking to you about President Trump. Let me explain something to you about why this is not a nation building endeavor. Right now, what you have going on in Venezuela is a Christian nation that was free, and now you're looking at a nation that will be free again thanks to President Trump. So I understand that many of my conservative friends are worried that this is going against President Trump's promises, that somehow we are nation building again here. I want to tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. There are some specific and very important differences between Venezuela and what you see in Afghanistan and Iraq and the like. What is the main significant difference? Venezuela is a Christian nation. Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Muslim nations that do not handle freedom well. In order to be a free nation, it takes an exceptional group of people. Clearly, America fits this bill. Other nations do too. Venezuela did. Venezuela experienced great riches. It had those riches stolen from them. Venezuela, at least the people of Venezuela, know what freedom is, love freedom. President Trump is restoring that to them and returning the wealth and freedom that was stolen from them. So we will talk about that today on the podcast. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you about my friends over at Patriot Mobile. PatriotMobile.com/Grant, America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. This is a company that is doing it right when it comes to supporting the values and beliefs that we all believe in. PatriotMobile.com/Grant. Make the switch today. Stop funding the agenda of the woke left. That's what the big three cell phone companies are doing. Every time you pay your cell phone company, when you're paying Patriot Mobile, you know a portion of those proceeds are going to go to driving conservative causes like Second Amendment rights, First Amendment. Plus, the service is great. 100% US-based customer service. Make the switch today to Patriot Mobile. Use the promo code GRANT for a free month's service. PatriotMobile.com/Grant. All right. Again, talking about this miraculous, I would call it a liberation of Venezuela because it is starting the process of liberating Venezuela. I understand that many of my conservative friends don't like the idea of nation building. They don't like the idea of going into other countries. President Trump vowed to end wars, not start them. In many respects, I think that's exactly what you're seeing here from President Trump. This is protecting us from getting into a future endeavor. Maduro had been warned on numerous occasions, and he chose to fuck around, and now he's finding out the results of all of that. So, look, President Trump goes in with probably one of the greatest military endeavors in American history. No injuries to American soldiers. We take Nicolas Maduro into custody. Now, as I said, why is this not nation building? President Trump talked about something that was very important in his news conference on Sunday. He said that the vice president of Venezuela had a conversation with the United States, that she was willing to abide by whatever America wants. President Trump said America is going to temporarily take over Venezuela before it can have a just and fair election and return power to the people. In that process, President Trump would bring in a team to run Venezuela. And then, of course, you have the oil companies coming in to restore what was once theirs, by the way. We'll talk about the oil as well here in a moment. But the vice president, sworn in as president of Venezuela, this female that was appointed by Nicolas Maduro. Let's be clear. She was never on any ballot. She said she would abide by what America's doing. Do I trust her? Absolutely not. But this is an important step as we move forward into making sure that there's not a wider, longer conflict or operation with American boots on the ground. President Trump did not rule out the idea of having boots on the ground in Venezuela. Now, here is the big difference here. When you think about what happened when we went into Iraq, the Iraqi people typically did not want freedom. They did not know how to embrace freedom. They, quite frankly, do not even know how to handle freedom. Same situation for Afghanistan, same situation for many of these Muslim nations. They are used to being ruled with an iron fist. And in fact, they do better when they are ruled with an iron fist. That does not go for the United States. And quite frankly, it does not go for many nations that embrace capitalism and freedom. Venezuela was a nation like that. So again, that freedom, the wealth, was stolen from the people of Venezuela. They know what freedom is. They know how to embrace freedom. They know the benefits of capitalism. They know the wealth that their country once had. And when you look at the people that fled Venezuela and had their riches stolen from them, President Trump says this is about returning that to them. How do you argue with that? Nicolas Maduro's like the only illegal alien that Democrats in the United States don't want in the United States. That a tongue-in-cheek joke by Jennings over at CNN. Funny, yes, but also very true. You will see the mainstream media, who controls the Democrats, come out now and start to defend Maduro, defend the Maduro regime. They will start to criticize President Trump, all par for the course. They do not understand what President Trump is trying to accomplish here. So as this plays out, rest assured that President Trump has always been right. President Trump is a winner. President Trump knows what he's doing. So as you say, hey, we don't want to be involved in nation building, trust in President Trump. Every one of these Venezuelan boats that he had taken out saves 25,000 American citizen lives. One boat. That ends now. That ends that the United States is now going to soon be in control of Venezuela. Then you've got the situation of the oil. This is very different from what George Bush did in Iraq and going into Iraq and handing Iraq over to ExxonMobil and other big energy companies in the United States to simply go and prosper from a foreign land. That's not what's happening here. Much of the equipment in Venezuela, much of the refineries in Venezuela, much of the drilling rigs off the coast of Venezuela was built by American oil companies, stolen by Hugo Chavez and the Venezuelan regime that had taken power there. There has not been a legitimate election in Venezuela in a very, very long time. That will change. So what President Trump is doing when it comes to this oil, it's not just going and taking it so America can now have more oil. What this is literally about is about going in and securing the oil that was ours, returning wealth back to Venezuela, and then making sure that America will have an ability to prosper off of this. And in fact, it's payback. Think of the American lives taken by Maduro, the regime working with China. Now, here's my concern. What will the markets do? How will they react to all of this? It all hinges on China. To me, I take this as a sign of American might, of American dominance, of a president that is in control, of a president that is not going to allow American citizens to be tortured with these illegal drugs coming into the United States. All of that tells me a positive sign for America and the economy ahead. So I'm hopeful the stock market will see it the same way. We will see how the day plays out today on Monday. So all of it, though, interesting. I would imagine gold prices would skyrocket anytime we see this type of thing. You see gold start to move in that direction. So again, a big salute to the United States military who had practiced this, had waited patiently for a break in the weather, and then went in and carried out their duties. Largely, as President Trump and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio mentioned, is a law enforcement operation. Okay, and that's very important to tell you. This is a law enforcement operation. We had law enforcement agents on the ground with the military to arrest Maduro, bring him to justice, ultimately to be tried in a court of law in New York. So again, congratulations to President Trump, and I would urge everybody out there, just take a step back and know that the media and the Democrats that defend this craziness, that defend Maduro, that fight for a rogue regime, that are upset with President Trump, they expose themselves as the anti-freedom, anti-American goons that they really are. All right. Hey, folks, listen to me. Energized Health. Man, now is the time. They have the My 555 challenge, energizedhealth.com. You can go to their website or you go to my555challenge.com. Learn about intercellular hydration. This is 5 days, $5, 5 pounds, guaranteed. I lost 15 pounds in the first 2 weeks on the Energized Health protocol. This is an opportunity to test that out. Energizedhealth.com or go to my555challenge.com and you tell them that Grant Stinchfield sent you. All right, turning now to the Somali fraud uncovered by Nick Shirley. First off, we all knew the fraud was going on. I find it humorous that you have the mainstream media now defending the Somali fraudsters. They're now defending Tim Walz, and they're trying to call Nick Shirley some kind of a huckster who made it all up. All you have to do is go pay a visit yourself to some of these daycare centers. Go talk to the neighbors that literally said, hey, there's nobody here. And so as he uncovers this, you get the Democrats who are now defending the Somali fraud. Why? Because Democrat leadership looks bad. They can't have that, especially going into the midterms. So they're going to hunker down and do all they can to perpetrate a real fraud on the American people, and that's covering up the truth. So why does all of this matter? Well, it matters, I think, most because it's an abuse of taxpayer funds, and not just an abuse by alleged scammers and fraudsters on taxpayers underneath the noses of investigators and lawmakers. I believe it was an abuse and taxpayer fraud enabled by the regulators, lawmakers, and investigators. You are now seeing reports of inspections of these daycare centers where there's violation after violation after violation, where there were no records kept on children, there were no records kept on people working there. And when you think about no records kept on any of this stuff, well, how then do you continue to operate taking in millions of dollars all at a time when you're not having any kids there? So again, the regulators, the state investigators who went in to check up on these daycare centers knew there weren't any kids there. Now, some of the daycare centers come out and say, oh, well, we take kids in after school. They may take in kids after school now that they were exposed. I would have been curious to show up after school before they were exposed and see if any kids were there. That would be the real question. So for a nonprofit, there's a group called Feeding Our Future that allegedly fraudulently claimed hundreds of millions of dollars. It has been called the largest pandemic relief fraud in the country. This is on top of the daycare centers and healthcare agencies that Nick Shirley had uncovered. Federal investigators say up to $18 billion allocated to social service programs in Minnesota since 2018 may have been misused. $18 billion. Now, I believe if you look at California and you look at New York, this is going to pale in comparison to what's going on in those two states. So what we need is oversight. We need accountability, and that is a non-negotiable. But under the so-called leadership of Tim Tampon Walz, you're not getting that. So I think what was uncovered now in Minnesota highlights the vulnerabilities in our welfare systems nationwide. That the fraud is not just a local embarrassment in Minnesota, it is a national warning. And the Minnesota case shows how welfare programs can be exploited if state oversight fails. And again, I'm not really convinced that it was a failure of state oversight rather than a willing ignorance on behalf of state regulators. Why? They were afraid of being called racist. You can't investigate the Somalis. They're the ones that help put you in office. You're going to be like those evil conservatives going after black folks. Give me a break. None of us care what color fraudsters are. What we care about is getting the fraud under control. And again, the mainstream media will ignore all this. You watch as this plays out. Now they go after and attack Nick Shirley. He's a young man. He's a YouTuber, for crying out loud, that literally did what the mainstream media refused to do. Not what they couldn't do, but what they wouldn't do. And there's a big distinction there. So here's another reason why this story really does matter on a national level. Minnesota has the largest Somali population in the United States. Many of these already charged defendants in the fraud cases, many of the suspects in the new fraud cases that are being created, if not all of them, are Somali. It raises the question about how welfare incentives, immigration policy, and community integration all interact with each other, how they intersect with each other. So here's what I'm saying. It seems to me the Somali community does not want to integrate itself into the American way of life. Somalia is a country that is ripe with fraud. One of the most fraudulent countries in the world. Who do you put next to it? Ukraine, Russia, and many of those other Eastern Bloc countries as well. But when you go into Africa, going to Somalia, Nigeria, many of these other countries, fraud is all they know. They come to the United States and they see a system that is oftentimes based on trust, and that's one of the flaws of the American system, and they exploit it. So this is why federal lawmakers, state lawmakers need to treat this like organized crime, because that's what it is, and relate that when you're making immigration policy as to why we need to limit what is happening when it comes to letting people who have very bad intentions into this country. So the media downplays all of this, deflects the coverage in all of this. Why? Well, major, what I would describe as legacy outlets, are framing the coverage by debating how the story is talked about rather than what was exposed. They're debating how I present the story to you over the story itself. So again, they go back and fall back on their tried and true narrative that we're all racist, and the only reason we're exposing this is because we're going to go after black folks, or we're going to go after immigrants, and if we go after immigrants that happen to be black, well, that's a double whammy on behalf of the mainstream media. So this is what they focus on, rather than focusing on the story. And it's a shame that they don't, because even the mainstream media, as they try to debunk Nick Shirley, they didn't go and pull any of these inspections by state investigators of these places. And when they do, they basically are trying to claim that they're legitimate organizations who have legitimate violations, rather than the bigger story, they're not serving children and they're taking taxpayer dollars. So the Star Tribune, that's Minneapolis's main paper, basically described questions prompted by a viral video. That was the quote they used to describe Nick Shirley's video. Questions prompted by a viral video. They worried about, quote, rhetoric, even as these investigations were continuing. Come on. And that's the Star Tribune. We saw that in most of the legacy media outlets. Here's another problem with the mainstream media. Their coverage emphasizes sensitivities over substance. So PBS and other outlets like PBS lean into these debates over federal agents and immigration friction, rather than walking through the fraud mechanics and the financial magnitude of it all. They want to focus on the agents targeting immigrants instead of the mechanics of the fraud and how it all unfolded. So they want to sympathize with the illegals, when in turn what happens is they're sympathizing with the fraudsters themselves. Now, some outlets suggest that all of this is exaggerated. Nick Shirley picked and chose where he went. He walked through a building with 60 different healthcare agencies, and he found the same story in every single one of them. So this is not exaggerated. They want to say that we are politically weaponizing this story. Not true. The story weaponized itself. And the actions of Democrats who failed to catch this fraud in action and enabled it, weaponized it against us, against themselves. It was political suicide for them. So if there was any weapon here, it was Democrats using the weapon against themselves, and they had no idea it was going to turn on them. So again, this is far greater than some local issue in Minnesota. All right? This is ensuring public programs aren't abused. This is about protecting taxpayer dollars. This is about holding both state and federal lawmakers accountable. This is about the immigration debate and who we want here in our country. We will not stop talking about this story no matter what the mainstream media wants. Hey, folks, listen to me. Speaking of the mainstream media, they're going to tell you that you got to get your flu shot this year. They're going to tell you they got to get your COVID shot this year. I'm here to tell you, not a chance in hell. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to twc.health/grant. That's twc.health/grant. Use the promo code GRANT for 10% off. Get yourself an emergency contagion kit. Okay? That's going to have ivermectin in there. It's going to have hydrochloroquine in there. All the things you need to fight back against any threat that you may find that enters your household. I also want you to get the Spike Detox. This is part of the McCullough protocol. And then the throat and nasal spray, the immune defense spray. You use that daily, and you will protect yourself. twc.health/grant. Use the promo code GRANT for 10% off. I promise you, you will not regret it. All right, I want to talk now about some of the biggest accomplishments that President Trump has had, and in turn, some of the biggest stories of 2026 and what this means for all of us going forward. I think first and foremost, this the number one story of 2025 had to be President Trump's comeback and the collapse of the lawfare narrative. Look at what had happened with election integrity. We learned over and over again, every story that would come out, that the election was stolen in 2020. You go down to Atlanta, 318,000 ballots that weren't certified properly. We knew something was going on there, and now 5-6 years later, we're only just now finding out about this when we knew this was the problem. President Trump was vindicated at every level when it came to the lawfare that was being waged against him. Courts, including the Supreme Court, started to throw this out. Once he was sworn into office, I think what you saw was the resurrection of President Trump. Poll numbers surged back. Now, they surged also with each attack. So what did you expect to happen? The Democrats were dumb when it came to this. So Americans clearly saw that the justice system in America was being weaponized against President Trump, and Americans responded big time with that. Of course, the election in 2024, and then support of President Trump through 2025. Now, what was the result of all of this? Our justice system lost an awful lot of credibility. Trump's America First agenda has re-entered the driver's seat. There are some downs to this too, though. We don't have the retribution that we want. That was not the story of 2025. I believe the story of 2026 is going to be the story of retribution. This is going to be the year that we end up getting what we want, and that is justice from those that perpetrated the theft of the 2020 election, justice from those who committed so many crimes against us when it came to COVID, justice when it comes to the J6 fiasco, and when it came to the Russian collusion hoax and every other piece of lawfare waged against President Trump. I have been told, excuse me, I have been told from the highest level of the Trump administration that these investigations are ongoing. They promise me they will come to fruition. They are apologetic that it has taken this long. But they urged me to urge you to understand that these things take time. They're taking a little more time that makes me happy, but I will give them some leeway on this until I get to the point where I just don't believe it anymore, and we have to end up seeing what happens. But I am hopeful for 2026 that becomes the year of retribution. Now, the other huge story for 2025 had to be President Trump and the border. What this man did, the border crisis was undeniable. And how do we call it undeniable? We call it undeniable now because we see what happens when you shut a border down, and we see how quickly you can shut it down. Think about the things that President Trump has done literally overnight. He brought the National Guard into Washington, D.C., and overnight, crime drops. Brings the National Guard into Memphis, Tennessee. In just days, crime down 77% in that city. And then you look, of course, the border. Literally overnight, we go from a flood of illegals to zero. Not one illegal alien released into the interior of the United States in 2025 under the watch and command of President Trump. That has to be one of the biggest stories of 2025. That will continue, of course, into 2026. We see these fentanyl deaths that were linked to the border crisis. That is what sparked everything going on in Venezuela that we just talked about today. So we had an awakening when it came to the fentanyl crisis, what the open border meant for America, and the damage that Joe Biden and his regime had committed against the people of America. And again, the takeaway from 2025 is that borders matter, sovereignty matters, and Democrats own that disaster. Republicans, specifically President Trump, are the solution makers. And that's a good spot for us to be. The Supreme Court reasserts the Constitution. This is a great example of what 2025 was all about. A Supreme Court basically set up by President Trump. Now, the left will tell you it's a bogus Supreme Court. I'm here to tell you it's probably the truest Supreme Court we've ever had. Some of President Trump's appointments have disappointed me at times. Not 100% happy with the Supreme Court's decisions, oftentimes of the cases that they do not take up. But I do believe the Supreme Court reasserted that the Constitution is the rule of law of the land of America. It reined in federal overreach. The Supreme Court pushed back on unelected bureaucrats. It protected free speech and parental rights. Basically, the administrative state, the ruling class of career bureaucrats, the deep state, took a huge hit in 2025 by the Supreme Court pushing back against them and saying President Trump as the executive, any president as the executive, has the right to run his agencies as he sees fit. Conservatives took notice to this, and of course, America is in a better spot because of it. This is another story that we saw play out over the last 4 years and had become ultimately solidified in fact during 2025, is that the media's credibility has 100% completely collapsed. So what is the media doing? They continue to repeat false narratives that have already been exposed. It only makes them look worse. It's as if they think we are done. Independent media has exploded. Podcasts like this, what Nick Shirley did in Somalia, that is huge. Amazing. Conservatives increasingly took control of the information battleground, whether it be on Twitter, Truth Social, and the rise of Truth Social is pretty amazing too, by the way. I've got over 1 million followers on Truth Social, and people going to places they trust, reining in the social media companies. Only President Trump was able to do that once he took back over. Is it still a problem? Absolutely. Do I still have to navigate Facebook and Instagram and TikTok? Yes, but it's not as bad as it was. YouTube, still a disaster, but not as bad as it was. Those social media companies were exposed. The mainstream media was exposed. The Democrats were exposed for their war on free speech, because ultimately, when free speech started to take off under the Trump administration, it made maybe independents, maybe some on the left realize, wow, we really did claw down and hammer away at conservatives and try to squash their ability to speak their minds in a big way. They were exposed for that. Big differences to come now. Thanks to President Trump, we have seen the death of woke corporate America. DEI is all but dead. Most Fortune 500 companies have done away with their diversity, equity, and inclusion departments inside their companies. Disney is slowly making changes, not as quickly as I would like, but slowly making changes. Corporate America realized DEI hurt profits. Political activism, especially activism on the left that goes against the values of America, alienates customers. That's a huge problem. Shareholders want results. They don't want lectures. Corporate America has seen that. So companies are quietly pulling back now, a major cultural win for common sense, President Trump, and the America First agenda. Now, each one of those things, all right, all have a common theme. It is America rejecting the elites. It is America rejecting weakness. And it is America demanding leadership again, and that's exactly what we got from President Trump. And I couldn't be happier with where we are headed into 2026. So I'll leave you with this. Have faith. A little shorter podcast than I normally do, only because I'm on vacation here. I will be back for the Real America's Voice show tonight at 7 p.m. But have faith in President Trump. Have faith in the team. Know that everything that he's doing, he's a winner. Things are working out. The tariff situation, working out. Taking the fight to our enemies, working out. Peace is really now more prolific and being seen throughout the world than ever before. Why? Peace through strength. President Trump, America First agenda is working. Have faith. Do not fall into this trap that some inside our own party are setting for us just because they want likes and clicks. Do not fall into that trap. All right. Listen, real quick. I think gold's going to explode recently. GrantLovesGold.com. That's GrantLovesGold.com. 2-minute video there. You can check that out, and you can see exactly why gold may be right for you. You watch that 2 minutes, you're going to figure out very quickly whether or not gold is the right move for you or not. GrantLovesGold.com. That's GrantLovesGold.com. Check that out. I promise you, you will not regret it. All right, folks, that is going to do it for us. Stinchfield's Army rolls. Thanks to all of you. And we will see you tonight on the Real America's Voice show, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Grant Stinchfield. Thanks for watching.